If you have your Bible, open to the book of the Song of Solomon. Song of Solomon. This is part 2 in a 5-lesson study on this Old Testament book on the subject of things that are often neglected. This would be one of those books that is oftentimes not thought too much about. And I'm not going to revisit what we said last Sunday night about this book, other than I want to just highlight for you the main thing that I tried to accomplish as we kind of did an introduction to this book. Wrong button. What we tried to do in part 1 was just introduce this book and talk about what this book is really all about. And this will be the last thing that I'm going to say about this, but a lot of people think this book is about two people. It's about King Solomon and this bride of his that he is particularly fond of, and it's a story about their love leading into their wedding ceremony and their honeymoon and even into their marriage. So this is a book about marital bliss. This is a book about the sexual union between a husband and wife. I don't think that's what this book is about. I believe this book is actually about 3 people, not 2. It's about a young girl who has smitten the heart of King Solomon, and he tries to woo her by using all of his riches and wealth and flattery that he would possess as the king. But she is already in love with a humble, very poor shepherd farmer, and they have a very real, genuine love that's not based upon superficialities like what Solomon is presenting to her. And so she has a choice to make between 2 men. She can have the king in all of his splendor and wealth and have everything her heart ever desires in terms of material wealth and prestige and power. Or she can choose true, genuine, sacrificial, committed love with this poor, smelly shepherd. And so she has a choice to make. Who is she going to give her affections to? And when I started this series last Sunday night, I thought about doing this in Monday and Tuesday night of last week during the VBS. But I decided not to do that because I think this book is immensely practical for young people. It's a book about dating and who you choose to give your heart to. And it gives us a lot of practical applications about the dating culture that young people face. And since all of our young people were downstairs for VBS, I didn't want to preach these lessons while they weren't able to hear them. So that's all I'm going to say about the introduction to the book. If you missed last week's introduction, I invite you to just go to our YouTube channel, listen to that sermon, and I will lay out some things in more detail. But let's just remember, I have fat fingers tonight, and I can't push the right button. Okay, there we go. All right, so let's just set the scene again. Remind ourselves of where we ended in our study last week. If you go to chapter 8 in the Song of Solomon, last chapter of the book, chapter 8, look at verse 11. Solomon had a vineyard at Baal-Hamon. He entrusted the vineyard to caretakers. Each one was to bring 1,000 shekels of silver for its fruit. Solomon, the king, has extensive vineyards. He has multiple vineyards, and he leases those vineyards out to workers. And Solomon one day decides to go out riding through the countryside and inspect his vineyards and see the produce, see how they're doing, these workers, how they're doing tending his fields. And while he's out there, if you go back to chapter 6, while he's out there in the vineyards, he sees this beautiful woman who just takes all of his attention. Verse 11, I went down to the orchard of nut trees to see the blossoms of the valley, to see whether the vine had budded or the pomegranates had bloomed. And before I was aware, my soul set me over the chariots of my noble people. Chariots, horses, you get this idea of horses that are running swiftly and they're pulling chariots, they're moving at a very fast pace. And Solomon says, that's what my heart started doing. I went out in the vineyard, I looked up, I saw this beautiful young maiden who was working in my fields, and I was just totally captivated by her beauty. My heart started racing. I didn't know what had happened to me. And so he takes her, he orders his servants, go get that girl and bring her into my tent. He's out in the countryside, so he's not back in the palace just yet, not back at his home yet. But he says, bring her into my quarters. And so that's setting the stage of where we left off at the end last week. Now, if you go back to chapter 1, the first 3 verses and the first half of verse 4 talk about this Shulamite woman, this young girl, this girl who has captivated Solomon's attention, okay? And she says in verse 2, may he kiss me with the kisses of his mouth. And she's talking about this shepherd that she loves. She's talking about her boyfriend. For your love is better than wine. Your oils have a pleasing fragrance. Your name is like purified oil. Therefore the maidens love you. Draw me after you and let us run together. I am so in love with you. Let's just run off and elope together, okay? So she said, you know, your perfume, your oils have a pleasing fragrance. In other words, she likes the smell of his cologne. And she's thinking about the smell of his cologne and just how wonderful he is. No wonder the maidens love you. What woman out there would not love you? And I'm so lucky to have you. And you see her thinking about this shepherd that she is so in love with. But the end of verse 4, well, not the end of the verse, the first part of the verse, she says, draw me after you, let us run together. The king has brought me into his chambers. You see, she kind of shifts direction. I'm so in love with my shepherd. He's so wonderful. I love him so much. I think about him all day long. You know, you kind of picture her pulling the petals off the flower. He loves me not. She's kind of in that daze, you know. And then she says, oh, and by the way, the king has brought me into his chambers. Solomon has now brought her into his quarters, and he is going to start wooing her and start making his appeal to win her love. Now, we go into this first scene, all right? Remember, I said last week, you got to think about this like it's a drama, like you're watching a play at the theater, okay? So the curtain's opening up now, and here we are in the second scene, and we are now preparing to meet King Solomon. The Shulamite woman is about to meet King Solomon. Look at the second half of verse 4. We will rejoice in you and be glad. We will extol your love more than wine. Rightly do they love you. I said last week, and I want you to remember this, your Bible probably places headings. We think, we think Solomon is speaking now. We think the woman is speaking now. I want you throughout these studies to disregard those headings, okay? Just follow me where I'm going on the screen, and I will give you who I think is speaking, and then you can follow this study with me. And if you think I'm right, that's great. If you don't, that's okay too. But the daughters of Jerusalem, it's a group of women who are either the women in Solomon's harem. Remember, he had a whole lot of women in his harem. It's either the women of Solomon's harem, or it's the servants of the women in Solomon's harem who are speaking. So all throughout this book, all along, you'll see in your Bible, daughters of Jerusalem. They're the ones who are speaking. It's easy to tell when they're speaking because they use plural pronouns. We. Okay? When Solomon's writing about himself, when the Shulamite woman is writing about herself, they're not going to speak in plural pronouns. So when you see plural pronouns like we, then you know that it's the daughters of Jerusalem. They say, we will rejoice in you and be glad. We will extol your love more than wine. Rightly do they love you. The you, your, and you in that verse, in their expression, those pronouns are all masculine, singular pronouns. They're masculine, so that means they can't be talking to a woman. and they're singular. So these women are speaking this to King Solomon. Look at you. You're the king. You've got everything. What woman would not love to have you? And so they're saying to the Shulamite woman, in essence, look at this opportunity that you have. Solomon wants you. He wants you to be wife number 61. Aren't you excited about that? He wants you to be the latest addition to his trophy case. Look at this opportunity. But the Shulamite woman, she's thinking about her shepherd. She's thinking about her boyfriend back out in the country who's out there with those sheep. But these daughters of Jerusalem, they're smitten with Solomon. They're in love with what Solomon can bring. Now look at verse 5. The Shulamite woman speaks here. I am black but lovely, O daughters of Jerusalem, like the tents of Kedar, like the curtains of Solomon. Do not stare at me because I am swarthy, for the sun has burned me. My mother's sons were angry with me. They made me caretaker of the vineyards, but I have not taken care of my own vineyard. Tell me, O you whom my soul loves, where do you pasture your flock? Where do you make it lie down at noon? For why should I be like one who veils herself beside the flocks of your companions? Let's break down what she has said here. She says, I am black, but I am lovely. Don't stare at me because I'm swarthy, for the sun has burned me. In other words, what she's saying is, my skin is darker because I've been out working in the vineyards. I'm not like these royal women who never go outside, who don't have to work out in the sun, who have very light, very pale colored skin. I've been out there working hard in the fields, and my skin is tanned, it's darkened. My brothers forced me to work out in the vineyards, but did you notice she says at the end of verse 6, I have not taken care of my own vineyard. I've been so busy looking after the vineyards of Solomon that I've not been able to take care of myself. I've not been able to look after my own self-image. I want you to think about who this is. This is most likely a teenage young girl who has been working out in these vineyards, and she says, I haven't been able to take care of my own physical appearance. I sense her experiencing this same self-consciousness that young girls today experience. You know, do other people think I'm pretty? Do other people like the clothes that I wear? Am I wearing too much makeup? Do I need less? Do I need more makeup? You know, they're going back and forth, standing in front of the mirror, trying to figure out, am I beautiful? Am I not? And she kind of senses that same self-consciousness that a lot of modern teenage girls experience. But then in verse 7, she's remembering her shepherd. Tell me, you whom my soul loves, where do you pasture? I miss you. Here I am in the courts of Solomon. I'm in the chambers of Solomon. I am away from you whom my soul loves, and I can't be there with you. I long to be there with you, and I wish I could. So, verse 8, the daughters of Jerusalem speak. If you yourself do not know, most beautiful among women, if you don't know where he is, go forth on the trail of the flock and pasture your young goats by the tents of the shepherds. If you want to know where your shepherd lover is, just go out into the countryside where all the other shepherds are, and you'll probably find him. Now in verse 9, Solomon makes his first advance to the Shulamite woman. She's been in the dressing room with the daughters of Jerusalem who have been changing her clothes from filthy work garments to, some new beautiful ball gown. And they've been dolling her up, putting on makeup and making her smell good because you're about to go have dinner with King Solomon. That's a pretty big occasion. So the daughters of Jerusalem are getting her ready to go and meet King Solomon. And we see in verse 12 that she's sitting at the dining table with King Solomon. Okay? So that's now the setting. So we go to verse 9, and here's what Solomon says to the Shulamite woman. To me, my darling, you are like my mare among the chariots of Pharaoh. Your cheeks are lovely with ornaments, your neck with strings of beads. You're very beautiful, but look at you now. You were out in the fields, and you were beautiful out in the fields, but now, look at you. You got on this dress and this beautiful necklace, and you got on these pearls, and you are a sight to behold. He says, you're like a female horse among the chariots of Pharaoh. Husbands, I'm telling you, take your wife to dinner and try that line on them. What does that mean? Well, it's historically known that when Pharaoh led his Egyptian armies into battle, he would only use stallions. He didn't use mares. Well, the enemies came to learn that. And so one of their tactics was, well, let's just bring a real beautiful mare out into the battlefield, and before the battle, let's just let her loose. And those stallions, they're just going to go crazy and go chase after the mare. Solomon says, honey, that's what you're doing to me. You're just making my heart race, and I just can't stop thinking about you. You're so beautiful. You're just like, you're making me act like one of these crazy stallions who's just chasing after a mare. All right? Now, imagine this girl sitting there at the dinner table with Solomon, and this is what he's saying. I mean, this is a king of Israel, and he is just doting on her and telling her how beautiful that she is. Now, this is the first time that Solomon spends any time with the Shulamite girl. And his words are very flattering, but they're really just superficial appraisals of her physical beauty. He seems more interested in her physical appearance than he does getting to know her, figuring out who she really is on the inside. Young ladies, let that be a lesson to you. You're going to come in contact with a lot of boys who just want to talk about how beautiful you are and how wonderful your physical appearance is. And I understand, that's flattering and you appreciate that, but if that's the only thing he pays attention to, probably not the guy you want to be with. Now, look at verse 11. The daughters speak. We, plural pronoun, remember, we will make you ornaments of gold with beads of silver. Solomon says, listen, you got the strings of beads, your cheeks are lovely with ornaments, and they, in essence, say, you think she's pretty now, let us work on her some more. We'll give her some more jewelry. We'll give her another gown and more expensive things to lavish on her. You think she's pretty now, you just give us some more time with her. And now in verse 12, the Shulamite speaks. While the king was at his table, my perfume gave forth its fragrance. My beloved is to me a pouch of myrrh, which lies all night between my breasts. My beloved is to me a cluster of henna blossoms in the vineyards of En-Gedi. In other words, a lot of times in the ancient world, women would take perfumes and they'd tie them on a string, on a necklace, and they'd wear them around their neck at night. And it gave a pleasing fragrance, maybe put some lavender in there to help them sleep, okay? And she says, that's what I'm thinking about. That's what my beloved is to me. He gives me peace. He gives me calmness and serenity. And he's like a bouquet of flowers. And he treats me like I am a beautiful and appreciated person. And so she's at the table with Solomon. Picture this now, all right? She's at the table with the king, and he's talking about, oh, you make my heart race. I'm like a stallion chasing after the mare. And she's sitting there daydreaming, thinking about her shepherd. I wonder how frustrated that might have made Solomon. Hey, right here, Like, I guess a modern day equivalent would be like a boy is trying to win the affections of a young maiden, and he's just lavishing compliments on her, and she's sitting over there texting. Okay, all right? This is not what Solomon wants, all right? Her mind is elsewhere. She says, verse 15, here's what her shepherd says to her in her mind now, okay? She's daydreaming. He says to her in her mind, how beautiful you are, my darling, how beautiful you are. Your eyes are like doves. She responds, verse 16, how handsome you are, my beloved, and so pleasant. Now, look at this language. Indeed, our couch is luxuriant. Maybe your translation says green. The beams of our houses are cedars, our rafters cypresses. Interesting language. Agrarian language. Cypress, cedars. The couch is luxuriant and green. In other words, she's picturing the outdoor dates that she and her shepherd would go on together. They would spend time together out in the fields, lying down on the couch of the luxurious green grass, staring up into the foliage of the trees above them, and that's the rafters of their house, the cedars and the cypress, okay? You picture this beautiful romance, budding, lying on the grass, looking up at the trees, looking into the stars at night, and she's thinking about, boy, I wish I was with him. I wish I was back with my shepherd, but here I am having dinner with the king. Now, chapter 2, verse 1, the woman is still speaking. She says, I am the rose of Sharon, the lily of the valleys. That was a very common flower in that part of the world. In other words, this is a very modest appraisal of herself. I'm nothing special. I'm just a daylily. I mean, those are a dime a dozen. You can find those anywhere. I'm just a regular old girl, very simple, very modest appraisal of herself. But here's the shepherd's response. Like a lily among the thorns, so is my darling among the maidens. No, honey, you ain't no common flower. Okay? You are a beautiful flower among a bunch of weeds, among a bunch of thistle. That's what I think about you. That's how you are in comparison to other women. You stand out far above the rest. Here's her response, verse 3. Like an apple tree among the trees of the forest, so is my beloved among the young men. Ladies, you want to pay a really good compliment to your husband? Sweetie, you're like an apple tree. Now she's going to tell us what she means by that. Keep reading in verse 3. In his shade I took great delight and sat down. The shade of the apple tree. Shade, oftentimes, the shade provided by the branches. Branches oftentimes provide safety and protection for birds and other critters. So she says, your shade over me, it's a protective idea. You're an apple tree in that you provide me protection. But that's not all. What else does he provide? In his shade I took great delight and sat down, and his fruit was sweet to my taste. He provides for her physical necessities, her material necessities. The apples of that apple tree provide food, and they nourish, and they give life. And she says, your fruit, you provide everything that I need materially. Verse 4, he has brought me to his banquet hall, and his banner over me is love. His banquet hall, in contrast to the dining room of Solomon that she's currently sitting in. Our banquet hall is outdoors among the rafters of cypress and the beams of cedar. She says, your banner over me was love. That's some strange language, but when military groups would go out to fight, at the very front of their squad would be a banner, a man holding a flag, and that flag stick would have a banner on it of some kind symbolizing, this is this army, this squadron, whatever. That was your sign, your symbol. And she says, your banner over me is love. A banner of love would be a physical expression of, a visible expression of his feelings for her. And I think there's an application that we can make as husbands there. Husbands, our wives need visible expressions of our love. In whatever form that may take, they need visible expressions to see our banner over them being love. And maybe that means that we need to help them with the dishes. Maybe that means that we need to help look after the children, or whatever it may be. They need to see visible interaction, visible forms of expressions of our love. And she says, that's what I receive from my wonderful apple tree. So, now, verse 5, she continues speaking, sustain me with raisin cakes, refresh me with apples, because I am lovesick. Let his left hand be under my head, and his right hand embrace me. If I was going to take Stacy out to a very nice romantic dinner on our next anniversary, I'm probably not going to serve raisin cakes and apples. This is peasant food, okay? This is a poor person's food. This is not the fare that she has sitting right in front of her as she is with King Solomon. You think Solomon's eating raisin cakes and apples? No. Solomon's killed the fattened calf, okay? She says, even if our food is minimal in cost and not all that wonderful, If I'm with you, that's all that matters. Keep your finger here in Song of Solomon 2 and go back to Proverbs 15. Proverbs 15, there's a similar idea. Proverbs 15 and verse 17. Better is a dish of vegetables where love is than a fattened ox served with hatred. A slightly different application, but the point is the same. Even if our circumstances are meager, it's better to have meager circumstances where love is in the home than to have the best of circumstances where things are not all that great. And she says to her shepherd, even if I'm with you and all we're eating is raisin cakes and some apples that we just picked off the tree, that's better because it comes with true love. Now, back to chapter 2. Verse 6, let his left hand be under my head and his right hand embrace me. It's a reference to this very close and intimate time with her beloved that she's fondly remembering. Those times when they were standing underneath the tree and the stars were out at night and the moon was there and he holds her and maybe he kisses her and he caresses her and she's thinking fondly about that time. Now, underline verse 7. Because this is a critical verse in the book. The Shulamite woman says to the daughters of Jerusalem. Now remember what they've been saying to her up until this point. Isn't Solomon wonderful? Look at what you could have with the king. Aren't you excited about what you could have? And yet she's kind of kicking back saying, yeah, but my shepherd, he's great too. And I like him a lot. Well, now she's with the daughters of Jerusalem and she says, I beg you, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles or by the hinds of the field, that you do not arouse or awaken love until it pleases. She's going to say this 3 times in this book. And what she is in essence saying is, I am begging you, don't rush me into a decision. Don't force me to love King Solomon. I just met him. I don't know anything about him. Don't rush me into a hasty decision. I don't want to be married to King Solomon and join this harem of women on a whim. I'm looking for true, genuine, committed love, and you're trying to force me to marry the king after I've only spent 15 minutes with him. Don't awaken or arouse love until it pleases. Now, I think an application of that is, and this is really hypocritical of me to say, but most often, whirlwind romances are not the best. I say it's hypocritical because I had a pretty whirlwind romance. Stacy and I met in June and we married in December. And even on into March and April of the next year, her father still wanted to kill me. But whirlwind romances are not necessarily the best thing. In some cases it works out fine, but oftentimes it doesn't. And this young girl understands that. Don't rush me. Give me time. I need time to develop a meaningful relationship. So, the woman, Shulamite woman, still speaking in verse 8, listen, my beloved, do you hear him? Do you hear my shepherd? Listen. Behold, he is coming, climbing on the mountains, leaping on the hills. My beloved is like a gazelle or a young stag. Behold, he is standing behind our wall. He is looking through the windows. He is peering through the lattice. Now, the context indicates that he's not actually physically present, okay? Remember, she is with Solomon. She is in the chambers of Solomon. She's still daydreaming about her shepherd. And you picture him, there she is in the courts of Solomon now, still out in the countryside, out in the tents, but she's there in the possession of Solomon and all of his servants and entourage. And you picture her shepherd, he's kind of standing there from a distance looking. Can I see her? Can I find her? Can I find her? And maybe he comes up with some little pebbles and he kind of throws those pebbles at her window trying to get her attention. Just come out and look at me. Come talk to me. Okay? That's what she's picturing here. She's thinking about him. She's desiring him. She's longing to be with him. She misses him. And in her mind, Verse 10, he responds. The shepherd, verse 10, my beloved responded and said to me, arise, my darling, my beautiful one, and come along. For behold, the winter is past, the rain is over and gone, the flowers have already appeared in the land, the time has arrived for pruning the vines, and the voice of the turtle dove has been heard in our land. The fig tree has ripened its figs, and the vines in blossom have given forth their fragrance. Arise, my darling, my beautiful one, and come along. She hears him, again, not physically, but in her mind, she hears him calling out to her, I wish I could be with you. You want to be with me, I want to be with you. Remember, turn back to chapter 1 and verse 4, where she said, draw me after you, let us run together. Let's just run off and elope together. And he responds to that here. Yeah, come on, let's go. Let's go tonight. Let's not even tell our parents. Let's just go. Okay? So this is the response that he gives to her. It is the shepherd's first proposal. The spring has come. The winter is past. The flowers are blooming. The foliage is beautiful. Come. It's the perfect time for our love to blossom and bloom just like the flowers in the gardens that surround us. Now look at verse 15. The Shulamite woman, she says, catch the foxes for us, the little foxes that are ruining the vineyards while our vineyards are in blossom. I'm going to say right now that that is the one verse that I struggle the most to understand in this book. But let me take this stab at it. I don't know who these foxes are. They may be literal foxes. In fact, I kind of tend to think maybe they are. But what are these foxes doing, according to the verse? They're ruining the vineyards. So they're running through the vineyards and they're trampling over the grapes and they're just making a mess out of everything that she's worked so hard to tend to and to look after. And she says, catch the foxes, get rid of them. Don't let the foxes ruin our vineyards. Because actual literal foxes who are in vineyards, who are making havoc of the vineyards, they are just like people who are meddling in our love life and saying, you'll never make it. Your love is not worth even trying to go after. Shulamite woman, look at what you could have. Don't you want to have Solomon as opposed to these daughters of Jerusalem might be the foxes. They're telling her, no, forget about your shepherd. Go for Solomon. And she says, listen, we've got to get all of this bad stuff out of here so that you and I can go and be happy together. Now, verse 16, she's still speaking. She says, my beloved is mine and I am his. He pastures his flock among the lilies. Until the cool of the day, when the shadows flee away, turn, my beloved, and be like a gazelle or a young stag on the mountains of Bether. So she views him as a young gazelle or a young stag. He's a strong leader. He's a protector, a provider. He's full of life and energy. And she just thinks about her beloved and how wonderful he is and wishing that he would come to her so that she can get out of this circumstance that she's in with Solomon and run away with him whom she truly loves. Now, we have a good chapter break here. Chapter 3 and verse 1 takes us into the next scene. And so we're going to stop here, but let me give you a preview of where we're going to go. The more time the Shulamite woman is in the company of Solomon, and the more she has these daughters of Jerusalem whispering in her ear about how wonderful Solomon is, the more she starts to doubt her love for her shepherd. She starts to become enamored with Solomon and his riches and everything that he can offer to her. And so we're going to come to a time where she's conflicted. Right now, she's resolute. She's strong. She's thinking about her shepherd and nobody else. But that's going to change as we continue on through the book. All right. Well, I hope the lesson is interesting to you. Studying a book that maybe has been somewhat neglected for many of us. I know it was for me for a long time. Hope you've enjoyed these first couple of lessons. These lessons are not those that would encourage somebody to become a Christian, but if you have some spiritual need tonight that we can help you with, whatever that may be, we invite you to please come as we stand and sing together.